The Holy Gospel according to Luke. Then Jesus said to his disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, what is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer. Then the manager said to himself, what will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes. So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, how much do you owe my master? He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. He said to him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, and how much do you owe? He replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it's gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much. And whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If you then have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you with the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. The Gospel of the Lord. The focus of the Gospels in chapters 14 and 15 that we had discussed before had been concerning the significance of table fellowship. We see Jesus welcoming those who were on the fringes of society. Jesus brings them into fellowship through shared meals, and he invites, even urges others to do the same. This serves as a reflection of God's own vast graciousness. Then in chapter 16, the discussion about eating with the outcast is firmly cemented in Jesus' overall message concerning possessions. We should use wealth in order to welcome the poor, even though they are unable to return the invitation or advance our own social standing in any way. In other words, our faithfulness to God is demonstrated by our hospitality to the poor. Our text today reemphasizes this point. These are the economies of God. We do not use wealth to accumulate more wealth. We use it to help others. The parable of the corrupt manager is a very good example of the danger in trying to interpret Jesus' parables in allegorical ways. First things first, what is an allegory? An allegory is a story that represents something other than itself. Some have tried to make the Song of Songs an allegory of God's love for God's people. It is not that. Simply, the Song of Songs is a love poem between two people, and I'm glad it was included in the Hebrew Bible. But what Jesus does, especially in Luke, is to use real-world stories about how the kingdom works. In verse 4, Jesus is saying that what you do to secure your place in this world, however corrupt the world and your own practices may be. But then in verse 9, Jesus is talking about securing our place in the life to come, to guarantee our place with God. The whole idea of using money to make friends was simply a fact of life in the Greek and Roman world, where the exchange of goods and currencies created and sustained and reinforced various forms of relationship, even friendship. But when Jesus is talking about making friends, we should remember that he's speaking in terms of being friends with the poor. Who are the poor? They are people who could not be expected to return the favor, either of welcoming or even invitation. This kind of giving to the poor is truly giving without strings attached. It is a solid example of what agape is. Agape simply is that love that doesn't look for anything back. But then Jesus expands the implications of what he just said. He said, we cannot serve two masters. But in the Greek and Roman world, it was possible to actually be a slave to two different masters, to be owned by two different masters. But these two masters, God and money, are so opposed to each other that it would be impossible for someone to serve them both. Now, in our translations, it says you cannot serve God and money. In other translations, it says you cannot serve God and mammon. Okay, so we translate it as wealth or money. Maybe even better than wealth, we should use the word greed. Gregory of Nyssa, writing in the 300s, thought that it was another name, mammon, actually pronounced mammon, that it was another name for Beelzebub. St. Jerome considered mammon to be an evil master that enslaves us. And John Chrysostom said that mammon was the personification of greed. So what did Jesus mean by that word, mammon? In the ancient world, the world in which Jesus lived, mammon was a literary figure. It was to be found in ancient Canaanite literature. It was even found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Mammon is a figure like Ebenezer Scrooge. Ebenezer Scrooge sacrificed everything for profit and greed. Or maybe more like Simon Legree. Now we think of Simon Legree a lot of times in the cartoon, the guy with the twirly mustache and tying the young maiden to a railroad track. But Simon Legree was actually the cruel plantation owner found in Harriet Beecher Stowe's book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Simon Legree would torment anyone who got in the way of his greed. He sees people as nothing more than tools for his profit. No, you cannot serve God and that guy. God surrenders wealth for people. God invites the poor to God's banquet. We're supposed to do the same. But even if we deconstruct the parables and look at them piece by piece and verse by verse and word by word, like we've just done, there is still the danger of missing the forest for the trees. The parable of the corrupt manager, the dishonest manager, is more important than everything I just said. Here is the underlying motive of the story. The manager knew he was corrupt. He knew he was guilty. He knew he was caught and was going to try to find a way to wiggle out of it. Was he banking on cheating his way out? Was he banking on outsmarting his employer? No. Through it all, the corrupt manager was banking on the kindness, the forgiveness, the grace of his employer. In his own foolishness, he tried to prepare an exit strategy should everything be lost. But deep down, the corrupt manager knows that his employer is forgiveness itself. He hedged his bet, but he was banking on grace. And therein endeth the lesson. God is grace and forgiveness and love. no matter what we do, no matter what we may have coming to us, bank on grace and thank God for it. Amen.